I grew up with someone in high school who had a very unusual way of speaking. He was very socially awkward and was very preoccupied with certain subjects. He just kind of seemed off, but he never did anything. People always had their suspicions, but it wasn't really known for sure if he was dangerous at all, even though he kind of presented himself that way. But now we're going to take a look at people that actually have this subject to deal with. What's it like to have a psychopath friend? Story 1. I have an online friend whom I've known for over 2+ years who's on the spectrum, but isn't quite what I'd consider a true sociopath. Just has plenty of tendencies. He won me over with his charm, aka superficial mask that most sociopaths tend to have when we first became friends, and didn't realize until months later the kind of person he was. He would always remind me of one of my favorite idols in sports, basketball, because of his desire for power and dominance, his innate pettiness, and his willingness to do crazy stuff, like working 2 jobs at once just so he could get to the top of the echelon, to become the best of the best. I know it sounds kind of tame compared to other sociopaths, especially since most people, normal people, would have been willing to do similar things in pursuit of a specific goal. However, his goal was to get to the top of a Godzilla gacha game, an awful, outdated gacha game that I had no business playing for longer than a year, yet due to his influence, I kept going on anyway, playing a small part in helping him get there. He would later come to achieve his goal of being a top player right in front of my eyes. And ever since I saw him do it, I realized that he could probably accomplish anything he wanted in life, as long as he was willing to deal with all the pain that such a task entailed, which to him was probably nothing more than an afterthought. He had a habit of treating people like they were his tools, and thinking that everyone in the world was a tool to other people just waiting to be used. Whether it was his workplace, his friends, and even his family, everyone was bound to become a tool to someone else, if not him. He even told me plenty of times that he has no issue making friends with child perverts, serial unalivers, and intimate violators, which I thought was a huge red flag, but would take offense at people who cheated at video games, claiming that people who lacked integrity and grace were the ones that truly ticked him off the most. Much more than what would normally tick off the rest of society. I still remember when I unintentionally poked fun at something he really, truly loved in an indirect way. A video game he grew up with, not the gacha game I was talking about earlier. Although to him, it was definitely more than just a video game. In retrospect, I was a dummy for not stopping when I needed to, but needless to say, my friend was furious, even telling me that he would have unalived me on the spot if I were to say the things that I said to him in real life. Thankfully, he would quickly come to forgive me, and we apologized to each other in our own awkward ways. Honestly, I thought about cutting him off plenty of times just because of how abnormal he was, and because of how corrupted his morals truly were. It didn't dawn on me until much later that cutting him off would have probably been the worst thing I could do for him. Especially because of how I became a sort of outlet for him to vent out many of his frustrations, which he told me himself because I was too dumb to realize it. He and I aren't currently talking to each other nowadays, but I still think about our relationship pretty often, and how he was probably the only true friend I had in my life. Sometimes I take pity at how he was raised. He didn't grow up in a very stable environment, after all, and I know how growing up with an awful mother and an awful environment, in his case, a schizophrenic mother that locked him and his siblings in a room for long intervals for years, as well as him meeting with many criminals in his life, may have played a huge part in shaping him into the person he is now. Although part of me thinks he could have also just been a jerkwad all along. But anyway, I think the takeaway here is that most sociopaths, or people with sociopathic tendencies, are not always who you think they are. Some people, in spite of how friendly they may seem, are more often than not putting on a mask, hiding something that they don't want the rest of the world to see. But no matter how messed up you think they are, more often than not, there's a good chance that you won't truly only be a bad person. especially if you can recognize when they have a few redeeming qualities, like my friend did. Of course, do keep in mind that some sociopaths will probably never be won over no matter what you do. Some are simply beyond salvageable, and for the really bad ones, you'll probably be cursed the moment they try to become friends with you. But not everybody will be like that, and there will be times when, for some of them, all they'll need is a bit of attention and care to ensure that they don't end up going down the wrong path. You'll be surprised how far some of them would be willing to go for the ones who know their true nature, especially the kind of people who they respect and consider in a positive light. It's interesting to see this one play out, but there is a difference here between a sociopath and a psychopath. The difference, and I'll admit this is a very basic difference, I'm not a psychological expert, but a sociopath can form bonds with a few select people, and they sometimes feel guilt. A psychopath has no ability to form emotional bonds, no remorse or guilt. It'll be interesting to see if there are some other stories down here that deal with actual psychopaths. Let's keep going. Story 2. The few stories where they were mostly friends are the ones that should tell you the most. After all, most psychopaths are flying under the radar. Also, there is, to the best of my knowledge, no treatment for psychopathy. If someone is on a trip without medications, then it's probably a different mental issue. Probably on top. I've met a bunch of crazy people, but the psychopaths were the sanest among them. By that, I mean that they're more logical, even in moments where others would totally lose it. They can be forgiving when you expect them to be angry, and they'll never be depressed or stressed. This makes them very likable and superficially trustworthy, someone who you'd want to have as an ally in bad times, though you can't trust them in terms of helping others because that's to be expected of friends. My favorite relative, my grandfather, was most definitely one. His childhood was beyond horrible, and he joined the Wehrmacht to escape it. He nearly ended up in Stalingrad and got severely injured twice. He has also seen horrible war crimes on both sides, but came out of the war mentally unharmed. He was the only relative talking about World War II. The others were too ashamed or traumatized. He never tried to paint himself as the hero or victim. He spoke in a matter-of-fact fashion and was rarely judging anyone, not Russians as the enemy or similar, but he hated idiots and incompetence. I really liked that about him, as the rest of my relatives were very judgmental. He was also the type of guy who wouldn't say no to any mischief, which was great for me as a kid, but not necessarily for the family. He did get into jail before my mother was born because he stole explosives from a demolition site and used it to fish in the city lake. He managed to make people laugh in court, but at the same time tick off his judge. Later, when his wife got scammed, he hunted down the scammers and beat them up until he had the money back. He later also beat up a relative because that individual got way too close to my teenage mother. He traveled to Russia with my mother at the height of the Cold War and smuggled goods in and out and cheated on his wife while neglecting my mother, who got lost in Moscow. Would you go to bang your former enemy's daughters? I think not. When I was a teen, I found an illegal firearm and proceeded to shoot it. While everyone jumped into hiding, he casually walked into the direction of the gunshots without any care in the world. He wasn't angry. He just asked me to hand over the rifle. When I fell in love with an Indian girl, my relatives freaked out about her not being white, Catholic, or Austrian. He was the only one who asked, "So what?" Yes, a former Wehrmacht member and minor war criminal was more tolerant than the rest of my relatives. I should add that he could be really nasty as well. He was extremely selfish and could exploit people, including his daughter, pushing her to drive as a girl in the middle of the night to his workplace to deliver things. And he caused a huge mess by exploiting my relative's greed by promising everyone the same stuff while secretly selling it and squandering all his savings. My relatives nearly tore each other apart while accusing each other of theft. Another psychopath I'd like to mention was my former boss. She was very charismatic, the perfect listener, and had the uncanny ability to adapt to the person she focused on by changing her behavior, mannerisms, speech, and displayed opinions to create the perfect person to interact with. Obviously, like a true chameleon, she couldn't adapt to 2 different patterns at the same time. This gave her away. She was also the best liar I've ever seen. I knew the truth and watched her in awe. Plus, she had the nasty habit of manipulating others to do her dirty work and taking the fall for it, if they got caught. I never noticed any aggression in her, but she did really creep me out because of her social skills. I jokingly called her out for being a psychopath, but to my surprise, she didn't deny it. She didn't even warn me not to tell others. Nothing. She knew that no one would believe me, and she was right. However, whenever we were alone, she stopped bothering and pretending to care about things she didn't. Seeing her drop the mask like this was seriously creepy. A lot of people say, wow, my boss is a psychopath. But for this person, it was true. How long did he work at this job? What kind of job do you think it was? Do you think he quit, or was he fired? Or do you think he's still working there? And did this boss ever get promoted? It sounds like she has the right social skills to be able to ascend the ladder. Maybe she's happy where she is, if a psychopath can be happy, and is fine at staying put. Story 3. I'm a close friend with a dude that might be considered psychopathic or sociopathic. Don't know. Been with him from kindergarten. But I think he either manipulated everyone from his youngest age or just snapped sometime later. Because from kindergarten to about 7th grade, he was very emotional and often cried when we joked about him. Me and my friends were regular jerkwads. Then around that 7th grade, something changed, and that dude literally stopped showing emotions. He never cried, never laughed, never smiled. Well, I exaggerate a bit, but it was rare to see his face express something different than plain nothing. There was a lot of uncomfortable moments throughout the years with him. Like one time in 10th grade, he brought his dad's big ol' hunting knife to school and cut himself with it. I freaked out and brought him to the toilet and used my handkerchief as a bandage. Didn't want him to get suspended. When I asked why he did it, he said he wanted to feel pain. This dude didn't have any emotion on his face in that moment, and it was totally creepy. Another story was in the same grade, but much later. He came to classes and said, "Hey, you see that news about minivan ramming into a bus stop? I was there. Totally hilarious." And proceeded to show us pictures he took of the accident while laughing. I haven't heard him laugh this genuinely in years. Our class president kicked him out of our WhatsApp group that day. About the accident? No one was unalived, by the way. All in all, he never explicitly tried to threaten anyone that I know of. He's pretty similar to another story. As in, if he asked, he never lies about his views on the matter. We had a debate between friends on the morals of experimenting on humans, and the dude totally agreed with it, saying that morals just stops the progress of science. He agreed with Nazis in terms that everyone with genetical diseases should not procreate, while he himself has one. The dude was born without a kidney. He isn't racist and not explicitly violent. Never suggested to shoot cripples, just so that they shouldn't procreate. He's pretty weird to talk to, but he knows a lot on different subjects like politics, science, psychology, religion, fashion. You can be sure that any theme you want to talk, he can talk to you about it. Even if he knows little about it, he just expresses his views on the topic. I wonder what happened to him that made him click in this way. Did he have an accident he didn't tell anybody about it and it maybe messed up his brain? It sounds like this guy is just content to just stay in the background and not really manipulate anyone. It sounds like he's charismatic, too. People seem to talk to him about a bunch of different subjects. It even sounds like people seek him out for his opinion.
Please like and subscribe if you've made it this far. I hope you'll enjoy the rest of the video and have a wonderful day.
Story 4. I had a mutual friend who was diagnosed with DID, but I didn't learn that until about a year after he and his boyfriend, my best friend, broke up, and my best friend told me about it. During the time they were dating, freshman year of high school, things seemed all right. He was a tad bit strange, with an obsession with unalive things and demonic stuff. I would also hear him whisper about seeing large black creatures about 9 feet tall. Only thing I can compare it to is the molded creatures from Resident Evil 7 in the corner of his room at night, whispering to him things he couldn't understand. He was nice, though, so I kind of brushed this off as maybe a side effect from a medication he took. In second semester, though, some things went downhill in my friend group. We ended up reporting him and 2 other group members. The other 2 were for different reasons, to the counselors due to concern we had for their safety because of some things said in a group chat we all share. I won't go into what the other 2 were saying as it's not related in any way, but for the friend the story is focused on, it was very dark. He was going on about how he hates his grandmother, who lives with his parents and him, and how he wished she would just perish, saying stuff about how he wanted to speed the process up and just wanted to stab her over and over again until she stopped moving. We were telling him to calm down and that he was just angry, but then he said that he was totally serious and that he likely wouldn't be coming back to school due to what he was going to do. We, the stupid kids we were, didn't call the police or anything. We couldn't call the parents either because we didn't have the contact information. In the end, we went to the counselors the next day with printed papers of screenshots from the chat. He didn't show up to school the next day. We learned the police were sent to his house for questioning, and a mental evaluation took place as well. Needless to say, he and my best friend broke up, and he ended up leaving the school and moving the next year after the incident. We all still occasionally talk to him, but we all keep at a distance. I do care for him, and he and I have a mutual respect for each other, but I question the safety of us all when he's around sometimes, and for that reason, we've not visited in person since he moved. Story 5. Still friends with him, actually. To most people, he's very normal and quite charming, but eventually he told me the truth that he just didn't feel. He only told me because of studies that said sharing your thoughts keeps you rational. I'm essentially a therapist for someone who doesn't feel, which is a bit weird. He bases all of his decisions around rationality without a hint of emotion. He asked whether I want him to get rid of people on multiple occasions, because he wants his therapist to be in peak mental condition. I asked him why he would only terminate if someone annoyed me, and not if they annoyed him. In his words, I don't really get annoyed, so I don't see the point, and unaliving someone is pretty risky. I'd only terminate for you because it gets over with quickly. If I were doing it for myself, I'd use another method to deal with them. I don't think driving someone to self-unaliving is a crime. That conversation is perhaps the most terrifying thing I've ever heard. He's a good friend, though, and I actually feel quite safe around him because of the way he thinks. I'm beneficial to him just by existing, so he has no reason to harm me, and he only acts as if he has a reason to. He also realized that even if he doesn't feel, other people do, and he extensively studies it. He cares a lot about my mental state, and he talks me through any problems I have with an even filter of understanding and cold logic, which helps a lot, actually. He's a good friend, even if I can't describe him as a good person. Story 6. Maybe not quite a sociopath, but definitely has sociopathic tendencies. My ex-girlfriend and I were extremely similar. We're both INFJs, so with a bit of past trauma and mainly her having sociopathic tendencies, it kinda acted like a feedback loop. Neither of us really felt much true emotion. Everything was just kinda intellectual, with a bit of anxiety here and there. The main thing I found from the experience was we both agreed logically on many fundamental aspects of morality, philosophy, and reality. To sum it up, everything is deterministic. All human action comes from emotion, therefore determined. To follow from that, everybody is inherently selfish, and all action is to feel better. I agree most strongly with existential nihilism and cynicism. Anyway, she cheated on me and we broke up. The interesting thing is, I'm an empath now as my dominant function. I can still at will switch to the cold, logical mindset and work through the most horrific ethical dilemmas with glee, though. Something to note is in both of these cases, my own emotions can very easily be swept aside, regardless of if I feel someone else's emotions. If I want to be, I can also be extremely manipulative. I found a more constructive way of letting that out, though, by playing mind games with my mates while they play a treasure hunt I made for their birthday, for example. My last one was 3 months of glorious torment. It's kind of interesting that he can switch from being totally emotional to totally logical. It reminds me of Star Trek when Data finally got the emotion chip inside of him, and he could just switch it off when needed. To be honest, sometimes I wish I had that ability. I feel like some things could be looked at in a much easier way and a more logical way if I didn't have the anxiety sort of clouding my judgment. But then, that sort of presupposes that being totally logical is always the right decision. We are not totally logical creatures or totally emotional creatures. We have both of those situations going for us, and we need to take both of those into account. Story 7. I was something like this. Had a thing going with a poor girl. I was obsessed with the idea of love and not love itself. I was unstable, had mood swings, and would act manipulative to her. I'd look for reasons to get upset and go off on her. When we stopped and she mentioned a girl's name, I said that it was a pleasant name, expecting her to get upset, and then I turned it on her. It all went according to plan, unfortunately. Eventually, we cut contact for a time, and I admitted to my therapist how manipulative and crazy I could be when I finally got into therapy. We're still friends, but we don't talk often and never hang out. I spend most of my time by myself. It's better that way. Story 8. My parents used to know a person who would marry women, convince them they're sick, and prescribe them medicine. The doses would increase and they would feel worse. They would think they feel worse because of the sickness, but it would be just because of the medicine itself. He would convince them to give him all their money and their will, and they would overdose. He tried it with 3 women, successfully unalived 2 of them, the first and the last. My parents knew the last one, if I'm not mistaken. The second one was never believed at first, but after the third wife, she finally put him in jail. I'm not sure if he was a sociopath or psychopath, but to me it seems like it. Story 9. I was in a friend group with a girl in middle school. She once stabbed one of our friends in the wrist with a pencil during art class because he was annoying her. That was in 7th grade, and she had skipped a grade, so she was 11, and continued to joke about it for years. That friend also had a huge crush on her, and basically went along with everything she proposed, no matter how much she belittled him. I eventually cut ties with her in 10th grade when she started getting really unstable after her parents' divorce. I don't know if she was a psychopath, but there was definitely some disturbing behavior. Story 10. This all sounds very inaccurate. I was diagnosed as having antisocial personality disorder some time ago. Pretty sure it's an incorrect diagnosis. But anyways, it's a lack of empathy, but not a joy of being cruel. It's a complicated thing to experience, I suppose. I don't take pleasure in hurting or harming others. I don't really feel the need to make them feel good. And when my friends feel bad, it's like I feel like I'm supposed to care. I don't, but I feel like I need to. For me, it's all very borderline, but it's a tough cookie to understand. Story 11. I had a friendly psycho, who had no issues taking out car tires, windows, threats, etc. for anyone who messed with his friends. He never did anything like breaking knees or such, but we made sure to keep him in the dark about a few things, just in case. One time, a coworker's boyfriend hit her. A few days later, the boyfriend woke up with a whole pig chopped into pieces lying around his room, blood and entrails all over the place. There was a cardboard sign that said, "Leave now, run," in the room. We know who had to have done it. Story 12. A lot of these aren't psychopaths or sociopaths, just mentally unstable. Maybe raised wrong, maybe had a deficient IQ, maybe they had traumatic events, maybe they're bipolar or did too many substances, etc. What defines a psychopath isn't violent tendencies. It's their lack of empathy. Yes, violence toward animals and people is a criteria for psychopathy. That's because if you do, it means you're probably a psychopath. But if you're a psychopath, it doesn't mean you beat up or unalive animals and people. Just that some emotions of yours are missing or weak. Story 13. I had a lot of psychopathy and sociopath-like traits that I grew out of over time. It scared me when I thought about how wrong my thoughts were. I still have awful thoughts like that sometimes, but it's not like I can't control them so much anymore.
Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.